I always believed that family protects you, not hurts you. But everything changed the day my sister claimed that Dad was giving her all his life savings. She stood in our living room with that cold smile, the kind that tells you she already won. Dad sat on the couch silently, staring at the floor, not saying a single word. And somehow, that silence hurt more than anything she could ever say. I asked her why she was talking about Dad's money like it already belonged to her. She shrugged and said Dad wanted her to have a better future, because I was already doing fine on my own. Hearing those words felt like someone punched the air out of my chest, because the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was holding everything together by threads, but I never told them. Maybe that was my mistake. Dad didn't defend me. He didn't deny it. His silence was the confirmation she needed. She walked past me and whispered, "Don't try to fight this. It's already done." That moment shattered something inside me, something I didn't even know could break. I went home and sat in the dark for hours, trying to make sense of it. Memories of Dad teaching me how to ride a bike, how he stayed up all night when I was sick, how he always called me his strong one. It suddenly felt like lies. If I was so strong, why didn't he choose me? Why wasn't I enough? For days, Dad avoided my calls. My sister acted like nothing happened, but I couldn't move on, not until I understood the truth. So I drove to Dad's house without warning. When he opened the door, he looked older than I remembered, tired. We sat in silence before. I finally asked him why he stayed quiet. He didn't look at me when he answered. His voice was thin and shaking. He said, "Sometimes silence is easier than choosing sides," but that wasn't an answer. It was an escape. I told him I deserved the truth. Instead, he apologized, but not for what happened. He apologized for not being the father he should have been. And somehow, that scared me more than anything. I walked into his kitchen to get water, and that's when I noticed something strange. Stacks of unopened mail, medical papers, and a prescription bottle tucked behind a cereal box. My stomach dropped. Dad had been hiding something. I confronted him, but he froze. His hands trembled. Before he could speak, my sister walked in through the back door like she owned the place. She asked what I was doing there and immediately reached for the medical papers too quickly. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't about money. This was about control. My sister wasn't taking care of Dad. She was managing him, isolating him, making decisions for him without telling anyone. And Dad wasn't silent because he agreed. He was silent because he was scared. I looked at him and asked if he even wanted to give her the money. His eyes filled with tears and he whispered, "I don't want to be a burden." My heart broke. He wasn't choosing her over me. He was giving up on himself. My sister snapped, saying he wasn't capable of making decisions anymore. She claimed she was the only responsible one. But I knew that wasn't true. Responsible people don't hide medical papers. Responsible people don't silence others. I told her she had no right to take everything from him. She smirked and said, "You weren't here. You don't get to show up now and play the hero." And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt determined. That night I stayed with Dad. I cooked for him, cleaned the house, and listened, really listened. He told me he felt like he was disappearing, like his life was being signed away without his permission. He said my sister convinced him I was too busy to care, that I had moved on, but I never did. The next morning, I took him to his doctor myself, and the truth was finally revealed. Dad wasn't incapable. He was depressed, overwhelmed, and untreated. Nothing about his condition required giving up control of his life. When we returned home, my sister was waiting. She demanded to know what I was planning. I told her the truth. Dad was updating everything. His care, his accounts, his legal rights. She turned pale. She realized she wasn't in control anymore. She yelled that I ruined everything, but I didn't respond with anger. I simply said, "You don't get to take someone's life just because you think you deserve more." Dad finally spoke up. His voice wasn't shaking anymore. He said, "I'm not dead yet, and my life is not a prize to fight over." For the first time, my sister had no words. Over the next few weeks, I helped Dad get his independence back. We talked every night. Slowly, the silence between us didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt healing. One evening, he took my hand and said, "I should have spoken sooner." I told him, "You don't have to speak loudly. You just have to speak for yourself." My sister stopped visiting for a while, but eventually she called, not to fight but to apologize. She admitted she was scared of losing him and thought controlling everything would protect her from the pain. I didn't forgive her instantly. Some wounds take time, but I told her she could still fix things if she stopped acting like she was the only one who mattered. Now Dad isn't silent anymore. He laughs more. He makes his own decisions. And I learned something I'll never forget. Family isn't proven by blood. It's proven by who stands beside you when everything is falling apart. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who needs saving the most. For a while, things felt peaceful, almost like life was stitching itself back together. Dad was improving. He was eating better, sleeping better, and actually smiling again. I started visiting every weekend, sometimes staying overnight just so he didn't feel alone. But peace never lasts, not in my family. It started with small things. Dad's pills went missing. His calendar reminders were erased. Important envelopes disappeared from the counter. At first I thought Dad just misplaced them, until the night I found his front door slightly open. Dad was asleep on the couch. The TV was still on, and a cold breeze was drifting through the hallway. Someone had been inside. I checked every room, every window. Nothing was broken. Nothing was taken. But it didn't feel like a break-in. It felt like a warning. The next morning, Dad acted strange, quiet in a different way. Not scared, but guarded. When I asked if my sister had been there, he hesitated before saying no. That hesitation was all I needed. Something was happening behind my back. That same week, I got a call from Dad's bank. They asked if I could confirm the transfer request. My heart stopped. What transfer? I asked. They said someone attempted to move all of Dad's savings again. But this time, using a new power of attorney. My hands went numb. I told them to freeze everything immediately. When I arrived at Dad's house, my sister's car was already in the driveway. Through the window, I could see her pacing, her voice sharp and angry. Dad sat at the table, shoulders shrinking with every word she threw at him. I didn't knock. I walked in. She turned toward me like she'd been waiting. Her expression wasn't confused, it was furious. She said I was manipulating Dad. She said I was poisoning him against his own family. I stayed calm, even though my pulse was shaking through my skin. I told her the bank called. Her face went pale for half a second, then she recovered, pretending like she had everything under control. She claimed Dad signed the papers willingly. But Dad looked at me with eyes that were begging for rescue. I asked him if he signed anything. He didn't speak. He just started trembling. My sister snapped at him to tell the truth, but the truth was already written across his face. He was scared of her, not disappointed, not confused. Scared. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not jealousy, a promise. I wasn't going to lose him. Not to illness, not to silence, and definitely not to her. I told her from now on everything would go through me. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You think you can save him? You're already too late." Then she walked out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. Dad broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly, like a person who ran out of places to hide. Dad broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly, like a person who ran out of places to hide. He said she told him if he didn't sign those papers, she'd put him in a home, take away everything familiar, take away his independence. He said he believed her, because when you're afraid of being a burden, you'll agree to anything. That night I stayed again, but sleep didn't come. Every time the floor creaked, I was wide awake. Every shadow felt like someone watching. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. The next morning, I called an elder attorney. I secured new legal protections, medical directives, everything my sister used against him. For the first time, Dad wasn't defenseless. But this wasn't over. Not even close. 'Cause 3 days later, Dad disappeared. When I arrived after work, the house was empty. His phone was on the counter. His jacket was still there. Even his shoes were by the door. It didn't make sense. Dad never went anywhere alone. I called my sister. She didn't answer. I checked the hospitals, the police station, nothing. Hours passed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Then at midnight, my sister finally called back. Her voice was calm. Too calm. She said, "Dad is fine. He's with me now. And if you really care about him, stay out of this." Before I could respond, she hung up. My heart wasn't just breaking anymore. It was burning, because now it was clear. This wasn't about family. This was a battle, and she just made the first move. The night I realized my sister wasn't just controlling him. She was hiding something. I barely slept after that call. Every horrible thought ran through my mind. What if Dad was scared? What if he was sick? What if she took him somewhere he couldn't leave? By morning, I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I was just acting. I drove straight to her house. Her driveway was empty, but her curtains were slightly open. Inside, the lights were off, yet I could feel someone was there. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. But then I heard it. A faint sound from inside. Not footsteps. Not movement. A cough. Dad's cough. My chest tightened. I called his name through the door. Silence. Then I heard something else. A whisper. 2 words. "Don't talk." My blood ran cold. Was she stopping him from answering? I stepped back and called the police for a welfare check. I thought my sister would panic. But instead, she smiled when she opened the door. like she had been expecting this. Dad was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor again, just like that first day. Except this time there was a bruise on his arm, not big, but dark and fresh. My stomach twisted. When I asked what happened, my sister cut in and said he fell. But Dad didn't nod. He didn't confirm it. He just kept blinking, slowly, like he was saying something without speaking. The officer asked Dad if he felt safe. My sister answered for him. She said, "We're fine. My sibling is just overreacting." The officer looked at Dad again. "So do you want to stay here?" Dad hesitated. It was barely a second, but it was enough to break me inside. Then my sister squeezed his shoulder and he whispered, "Yes." The police left, and I stood there feeling helpless for the first time in my life. When I tried to talk to him alone, she blocked the hallway and told me, "You don't get to show up years later and pretend you care." But she was wrong. I never stopped caring. I just didn't know he needed saving. Before I left, Dad slipped something into my hand. A folded piece of paper. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just closed his eyes like he was hoping I understood. I got into my car and opened the paper. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a note. It was a hospital report, dated 3 months ago. Diagnosis: severe stress-related complications and signs of physical neglect. At the bottom, the doctor wrote, "Patient appears intimidated. Recommend follow-up without family present." But that follow-up never happened. My hands went numb. This wasn't just manipulation. This was abuse, and my sister had been hiding it. I looked back at the house, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, not as a home, but as a prison. I made a promise right then. I wasn't going to fight for money. I wasn't going to fight for pride. I was going to fight for him, no matter what it cost. That night, I called a lawyer. Then I called Adult Protective Services. And when I told them everything, they didn't ask if they should investigate. They asked how soon they could meet. But before anything could happen, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this. You won't get another warning." I stared at the screen, frozen, because I knew that wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And suddenly, this wasn't about family anymore. It was war. The officer asked Dad if he felt safe. My sister answered for him. She said, "We're fine. My sibling is just overreacting." The officer looked at Dad again. "So do you want to stay here?" Dad hesitated. It was barely a second, but it was enough to break me inside. Then my sister squeezed his shoulder and he whispered, "Yes." The police left, and I stood there feeling helpless for the first time in my life. When I tried to talk to him alone, she blocked the hallway and told me, "You don't get to show up years later and pretend you care." But she was wrong. I never stopped caring. I just didn't know he needed saving. Before I left, Dad slipped something into my hand. A folded piece of paper. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just closed his eyes like he was hoping I understood. I got into my car and opened the paper. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a note. It was a hospital report, dated 3 months ago. Diagnosis: severe stress-related complications and signs of physical neglect. At the bottom, the doctor wrote, "Patient appears intimidated. Recommend follow-up without family present." But that follow-up never happened. My hands went numb. This wasn't just manipulation. This was abuse, and my sister had been hiding it. I looked back at the house, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, not as a home, but as a prison. I made a promise right then. I wasn't going to fight for money. I wasn't going to fight for pride. I was going to fight for him, no matter what it cost. That night, I called a lawyer. Then I called Adult Protective Services. And when I told them everything, they didn't ask if they should investigate. They asked how soon they could meet. But before anything could happen, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this. You won't get another warning." I stared at the screen, frozen, because I knew that wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And suddenly, this wasn't about family anymore. It was war. The truth that finally broke us and saved him. The moment I saw that threatening text, something inside me stopped shaking. Fear turned into clarity. If my sister was willing to threaten me, then this wasn't desperation anymore. It was control, slipping out of her hands. The next morning, I met with APS and the attorney. They reviewed Dad's medical report, the attempted bank transfer, the voicemail records, everything. They moved fast. Faster than I expected. By evening, we had an emergency order to remove Dad from the house if he was in danger. But nothing prepared me for what I found when we went back. The house was silent. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, still in his pajamas, staring at a cold cup of coffee. His hands were shaking. My sister stood behind him like a shadow. When she saw me walk in with APS, her face changed. Not angry. Terrified. She kept saying she was just trying to help, but her voice was cracking, like she already knew the truth was coming out. An APS officer sat beside Dad and gently asked, "Do you feel safe here?" For the first time, Dad didn't look down. He looked up. Right at my sister. His voice was small but steady. He said, "No, I don't." My sister froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. It was like all the power she held disappeared in a single sentence. Dad continued, voice trembling. "I was afraid to speak because I didn't want to lose my family. But I already lost myself." Those words shattered the room. APS escorted my sister outside while I stayed with Dad. He was crying, not loudly, just silently, like someone finally allowed to breathe after months underwater. He whispered, "I thought staying quiet would keep the peace." I held his hand and told him, "Silence doesn't protect you. It just protects the person hurting you." For the first time in months, he nodded without fear. That night, I took him home with me. No threats, no silence, no controlling hands, just safety. Just warmth, just us. Over the next few weeks, APS completed their investigation. And the truth came out. My sister wasn't stealing because she wanted money. She was drowning. She was thousands of dollars in debt, terrified of losing everything. And instead of asking for help, she tried to take control of the only thing she could. Dad's life, his choices, his voice. She wasn't evil, but fear can make people unrecognizable. She was charged, but instead of jail, she was ordered into mandatory counseling and restricted from making decisions for Dad ever again. One afternoon, months later, my sister asked to meet. I didn't know what to expect. She didn't defend herself. She didn't blame me. She just cried and said, "I didn't want to lose him, so I tried to hold on too tight." I didn't forgive her that day. Some wounds need time. But I told her, if you want to be in his life, you have to earn your way back, not take it. And for once, she listened. Now Dad lives with me. He gardens again. He laughs again. He calls me every morning just to say he's okay. And sometimes that's all I need. Last week, he sat beside me on the porch and said something I'll never forget. I used to think getting older meant losing control. But sometimes it just means finding the person who won't let you disappear. I looked at him and realized something. Family isn't the one who shares your blood. It's the one who refuses to leave when you're breaking. And sometimes the person everyone thinks is the strongest is the one who needs saving the most. Your support keeps this channel alive. If you felt something today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.